What's up, everybody? So it appears that Jorge Gamebred Masvidal is unretired and making his way back into the combat sports world. The question is it going to be in MMA, the UFC, or is he going to be, maybe doing a boxing match? And in today's video, I just want to discuss this topic. And do we really care, number one? And then number two, what I actually think Jorge Masvidal is coming out of retirement for. Because guys, here's the thing about Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. First of all, it was one of the biggest fumbles that the UFC ever had, was not booking the fight of Jorge versus McGregor. That was back when Masvidal was at the top of the game. He was one of the biggest names in the sport. He's still a big name. People still tune in. But guys, we got to be honest. People aren't tuning into the thought of Jorge Masvidal as much anymore, right? I mean, back when he was on a tear, he starches Darren Till, goes out there, KOs Ben Askren in 5 seconds, goes out there and beats Nate Diaz for the BMF title. This isn't the same guy, right? Taking that short notice fight against Kamaru Usman, where I actually thought Masvidal looked good in that matchup. Obviously, he didn't win. Usman did win the fight, but Usman did what he needed to do in that matchup. But we saw the speed of Jorge. We saw how good he is on the feet. We saw the rematch. Masvidal was on the sidelines for an extended period of time waiting for that rematch, gets knocked out brutally by Usman, and we just really never saw the same guy, right? He comes back, he fights Colby Covington at UFC 272, big matchup, big grudge match, all the emotions and animosity coming into this matchup, and Masvidal just gets ragdolled, man. He did hurt Colby with that check hook, but outside of that, it was, in the first round, Masvidal was landing some good leg kicks, but other than that, Colby Covington just dominated him in the wrestling. So then Masvidal comes back, fights Gilbert Burns. He has some moments. Again, with Masvidal down the stretch here, it was moments. Some of his fights had some good moments, but overall, Gilbert Burns is still a tough contender, man. Everyone's kind of shitting on Masvidal for that fight, and it's like, dude, Gilbert Burns is still a top 5 guy. So we have to recognize that Masvidal was fighting the best of the best. Now, why I think he's coming out of retirement is I'm going to list out 2 names that he's coming out of retirement for. And that would be, number one being, he's coming back to the UFC to fight on the UFC 300 card because they need some fights. They need some big names because it was announced that Conor McGregor is going to be taking on Michael Chandler at 185 pounds, which I'm going to do a separate video talking about why I think that's taking place, when it is, and why it's at that weight. But really, the only option for Jorge Masvidal is to fight Nate Diaz. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, there's no BMF belt on the line. It doesn't make sense. And it's like, guys, I don't know how many times I have to say, I believe UFC 300 is one of those cards where there are going to be fights that make sense, and then there's going to be fights that don't necessarily make sense, but are big names and OGs of the sport that people want to see compete again. That's what I believe UFC 300 is going to be built off of. Now, we've only seen a couple matchups that have been made. We haven't seen the big names and the huge fights announced yet. But if I had to guess, the only way to get Jorge Masvidal back into the game, right? Who knows all the personal things he's had going on? We know all the off-the-field drama, as you would say, with Covington and all this and that. Maybe the guy needs some money. I don't know. He's doing his own promotional stuff. But I believe that it's very possible that we see Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal too. Why? Well, it's kind of the perfect matchup for both guys, right? Nate needs a dancing partner. He's older in age. Jorge Masvidal's older in age. I don't believe Jorge's coming back to fight some top contender who's young and in the prime of their career, right? Jorge's, he's not an idiot. He sat there and said after his, Gilbert Burns fight, he's like, I just don't have that 3-pointer anymore. Just kind of insinuating like, I still can fight, but I'm not at the best. I'm not at my best, man, like I used to be. And, the fact that he recognizes that, I don't think that he's just going to come back and fight some dude that's just an animal in the prime of their career. So I think that this fight makes sense. Him and Nate are both older. The reaction time has slowed down. Their gas tanks are... I think Nate still has a good gas tank, but we've seen that, they're not exactly where they were physically, per se, which is expected. They're up there in age, but they both still have, I think, a little bit left in the tank. But this is one of those scenarios where we like this because it's 2 guys that are older in their career, and they're going to fight each other. We're not getting some young dude taking on an old OG and just having that whole thing. I don't want to see that. I don't think any of us really want to see that. I think we can agree on it. Now, if you actually want to see Diaz Masvidal too, that's debatable. That's on you. I'm just saying, I do believe that there's a real possibility we get this matchup. I know people are discussing the possibility of Jorge coming back and fighting Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt. That's a disaster. Justin Gaethje's been active. He's been fighting the best of the best for how long now? Justin Gaethje hits like a truck. He's got brutal leg kicks. I know Jorge Masvidal is a good striker. He's spent some time away. I think it's been, 9 months, whatever. At this point, it would basically be a year of inactivity. He's only getting older at this point. I do not like that fight between him and Justin Gaethje. And also, it's kind of hard, in my opinion, to sell that, right? I know Masvidal's got the name, but walking right into a BMF title shot, like, I know he was the BMF winner, but the guy's been on a losing streak, right? I mean, say what you want about him fighting the top guys, it's still a losing streak, unfortunately. So as much as I think people would still tune in for that, I think it's very likely we get Diaz Masvidal too, for the reasons I listed. They're both older. It's more of a fair fight, right? I mean, we saw the first matchup. It wasn't exactly going Diaz's way, but kind of as we know, as the fight plays on, Nate started to land some good shots. Jorge starts to get tired, and then the fight gets ultimately stopped as they get ready to start the next round. I believe it was the fourth round because of that eye cut, or the cut above the eye of Diaz. So I would like to see this ran back. If both guys are going to come back, and I don't want to see them go in there against these young, hungry lions, man. Like, there's only so much you can do, right? I mean, not everyone's a Glover Teixeira. Styles make fights. Nate and Jorge rely on, standing and trading with guys. The reaction time slows down. It's just, to me, this is, if you're going to bring them back, this is a good matchup. Now, I do believe there's also a possibility that Masvidal's coming back to box. And I don't know how well that pans out. I know everyone says that Jorge Masvidal for all these years is one of the best boxers, and if he transitioned into boxing, he'd be one of the best to do it. I kind of disagree, guys. And this might be a hot take. I know Jorge's got good hands. I know he's got good striking, but as his career played out, he really was known for his kicks, man. He's very Muay Thai based. He's very upright. He's very tall in his stance, and he's very kick heavy. Now, he does have good hands. He does have a good jab, but here's why I disagree with people. The young Jorge had very good head movement. He was moving very well. He was a little bit lower in his stance. He had a good bounce to him. He was a lot more boxing oriented. And as he got older in his career, he really transitioned to being more of a kicker. And, he still utilizes that jab. He still has a good overhand right that he kind of wings a little bit, so that doesn't transition the best to boxing. But he does have good reflexes. He does have a good jab. He does understand striking incredibly well. So, I mean, I think he could do well, but against Jake Paul, we know the story. These older MMA guys go over, and Jake Paul's bigger than them. He hits harder, and Jake Paul's, somewhat a legit boxer at this point, right? I mean, he's not going to go out there and beat a world champion boxer or a top 5 guy, but at the end of the day, like, Jake Paul is training full-time boxing, guys. Like, we have to say what it is, but I don't want to talk about Jake Paul too much. The point is, there's a possibility he does that because there's a bunch of money and all these different things. But also, I do believe he's still under contract for the UFC. So I know Masvidal's hinted at boxing. I don't know how that would play out because I think he's still under contract for the UFC because, leading up to the Colby Covington fight, he signed a new deal, I believe, all this different stuff. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, the fight that makes the most sense if Jorge is going to return would be the rematch versus Nate Diaz because in a way, even though Jorge, if the fight would have stopped, or would have went the distance or whatever, and Jorge doesn't get submitted or hurt or anything like that, he probably wins, at least 3-2. So I think that this is a fight that the fans would like. It's two OGs of the sport. They're both older. There's no mismatch where it's like Masvidal taking on Edwards, where Leon's kind of in the prime of his career. And, and it just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what fight you could walk Jorge into at this point, coming off of a 4-fight losing streak, having the time away, saying he's retired, getting up there in age. I just don't think that that's something that makes sense. And we know he's a guy that wants to avoid the wrestlers at this point. So Nate's not going to grapple with him. If anything, Nate's going to hold him up against the fence, dirty box, maybe try and submit him or something like that. But that fight will be a war on the feet. What do you all think? Like, subscribe, comment below. What do you think's next for Jorge Masvidal? Do you think he's actually unretiring? And what fight would you like to see next for him? I appreciate you all, and I will see you in the next one.